Welcome back to AI Captain, the podcast that helps you navigate the complexities of AI development and deployment by sharing the internal story of WWT's AI journey. I'm your co-host, Marc DeSantis, and today we have our first guest, Brian Coles, who is a senior director and a lead developer on some of our most innovative AI products. Brian has been involved in some of the most exciting and innovative AI projects at WWT, and he's here to talk about the challenges and experiences of integrating AI into various applications and services, and the future of AI technology in his field. This is AI Captain, Episode 3, Adapting to New AI Models.
WWT presents AI Captain.
All right, Brian Coles, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Kevin was just walking us through some of the early days of generative AI a whole year ago here at Worldwide.
Feels like a long time ago.
Right. Talk about your experience there, because you were one of the first people that got pulled in.
Yeah.
What were you doing?
It was a surprise, right? I think ChatGPT had kind of just taken over the world by storm. Yeah. And so everybody was trying to figure out how does it fit into what they're doing, especially in a technology space. And so when Kevin tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, we're trying to do something that's a little bit more internal, need you to kind of step in and help out. My first reaction was, what can we do that's better than ChatGPT? And so it was a learning curve for me, too, to figure out, hey, wow, if we actually use this for more internal-facing documentation and things of that nature, that there's plenty to be gained from not just using a general-purpose tool. So then, for me, it was learning how all of this stuff works, and that was really difficult in the face of the rate of change that we were experiencing with the technology that was in play at that point in time. Kevin, I think, has probably talked about going from GPT-2 to GPT-3, so that the introduction of ChatGPT to 3.5 and now to 4, and then all the other LLMs that came along, in the wake of that too, and all the tooling that was being built around it. It's word salad, right? Mm-hmm. What's a Lang chain? What's a Weaviate? Yeah. What's a pine cone, right? And so you're really just trying to wrap your head around what is all of this stuff and how is it going to play a role in what we're trying to create here. So for me, the beginning was just immersing myself in that new vocabulary and trying to figure out how it's all going to fit. And
so in your role, you're a director, right? You have teams that report into you, but with this particular initiative, you were kind of pulled in as an individual contributor, right, to start building something?
It was.
And so was it just you at first doing this by yourself?
But I wouldn't say it was by myself.
Okay.
I would say that, we had a team of data scientists who were trying to figure out, like Kevin has mentioned before, it's all about the data, right? And so garbage in, garbage out. So we were trying to make sure that, we were doing a good job of organizing unstructured data in a way that would make this even possible. So a team of data scientists, data engineers, were working on that side of the equation, trying to make sure we were good. Now it's like, okay, now how do we apply the AI, the open AI, LLM-based approach on top of that data is when I got pulled in. And originally it was like, hey, Brian, who on your team can do this? And I'm like, well, we're tapped, right? We're at capacity. Right. We're building applications for sales operations, service contract management, services. I didn't have anybody who I could just spring, for an extended period of time. And we talk about how AI is indeterministic. Well, this engagement was non-deterministic too, right? That, we had no idea how long we were going to be sacrificing. So yeah, I just kind of stepped in and used some of my old developer chops and, dusted off a few things. And
yeah, I remember the first API had the word POC in it, right?
It still does.
It's true. It still does. So did you help to basically take the learnings that the data science team were coming out with and productionalize it? Is that what your role was?
Right. And we were at an interesting juncture too, because the OpenAI spec was just changing from, around the chat and the completions endpoints, and so we were using one day, and then the next day we're using another, right? And there's a total different input and output mechanism there. And so there's a lot of learning on the fly that happened. And so that's why I was probably grateful that it was just me kind of working on this and not trying to farm it out to people who also then had to sit there and try to figure all this stuff out. So I could work very intimately with our data science team and say, Harry, what are we doing today, right? Are we using this endpoint today, or are we using that endpoint today? Because, wildly different use cases, wildly different APIs to call. So there was a lot to consume in the early onset of this that was very confusing. And so it became kind of a second job for me, in nights and weekends type of work. My wife constantly asking me, what am I doing down in my office downstairs? But, at the end of the day, we were able to take all that we learned in, let's just say, May, June, July, maybe into August, and then turn around and hand that off because we realized that this thing is going to, grow legs, and it was going to stick around. It wasn't just a POC anymore. It was actually going to be real. And so, we were fortunate to have a small group of folks who were available, who could come in and help us build this out. And so we could take all the different learnings that we had gained from all this experimentation and say, hey, here you go. We think we're headed down this path. We're here. We're still here to support you, but I think you can take it from here.
And this was the TD&E team?
This is the TD&E team.
Okay.
Yeah, so they did a great job of coming into a vast unknown, right? And looking at this kind of hot mess that we had created in the beginning because we weren't sure what direction everything was going. But they were able to consume it, go out and learn on their own too. Because again, the learning at that point wasn't all that structured. We talk about Andrew Ng and deep learning AI and all that. Those are all new-ish, right? To the YouTube videos on this technology weren't great back then either, and a lot of it was kind of conflicting information. You really didn't know who to trust. But I think the TD&E team did a great job of coming in and figuring this stuff out on the fly, looking at the work that we had done previously and translating that into something that's going to make us successful. It provides a great foundation for a lot of the different products we're trying to build. They did a great job of coming in and running with it.
And maybe we'll just do a quick definition there for people who don't know. So TD&E is our technical delivery and engineering team. So traditionally, they're the team that's out working with customers, building customer solutions. We happen to have a group of them that were on the bench, and we're working with you on this.
Yeah, they were available on the bench. A lot of smart people, so it was really good that we got a solid group of people, led by James and with Eric. But they were able to come over and take what was traditionally seen as an internal IT based solution, lend their services to us, and we're extremely grateful for it. And they're still working with us today, so it's been great to have them.
And so talk about this idea of abstracting the model, right? So there's a few different ways of doing that. Yeah. I think we're probably using two different ways right now, even with LangChain being one, and then with the LLM's API, being the other. Talk a little bit about how that came to be.
Sure. So we actually started trying out LangChain, right? Because we realized that they were ahead of the curve in understanding how to interact with all the different components. It's not just the LLM, it's all the vector databases and other tooling out there. They've done a great job of writing wrappers around that and teaching you almost how to string them together. Yeah.
Creating embeddings, chunking, all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But what it didn't do a great job of back in the day was giving us visibility into what was our usage, like what was our token usage, and how efficiently were we asking questions and things of that nature. So we used it initially to kind of get us over the hump, the learning curve in the beginning, but we quickly realized where we felt we could do something different to get to some of the more underpinnings that we were searching for. And so that's when we decided to roll away from LangChain and just start kind of rolling our own. It's at that point that, like, any type of IT work, you refactor, right? So we built something and we realized it's probably not the most efficient. We could probably do it better. And so we've been on a journey ever since that to make sure that we're refactoring in a way that, again, is reusable. And so we've built some foundational pieces. You mentioned the LLM API. Kevin, I think, has mentioned the router. I think basically the same thing. So while we're trying to build for one production product, WDT GPT, we're at the same time looking back and saying, how do we build components that can be reused in other AI products that we want to build so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time?
Yeah, and kind of going back to my team. So, my team last year was responsible for our public-facing website. We call it the ATC platform. And so we started probably, I think, July timeframe with a hackathon. And so during that hackathon, we built out, maybe about 10 different AI solutions. And all of them were really using the LLM's API, right? Yeah. So at that point, it was called the WT GPT API POC.
Right.
But yeah, we were able to move pretty quickly because of that API that was out there and the abstractions that it provides. I think, going back to your point around refactoring and constant refactoring, one of the things that's on my mind moving forward is, how long will that API have a lifespan, right? Because as we've seen, even just with the OpenAI models, these evolutions of APIs, right? So you have the Assistance API coming out and like all these new features that are being added to it. It is difficult to keep up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where we were in July was a total build, right? Because you had different components out there in the marketplace, but for the most part, if you really wanted to be successful with this, you had to build. I think where we're getting to now is more of an integration. Yeah. And so what you need to be building now is the glue in between all the tools that you just mentioned, right? So the Assistance API is great, but what if I want historical chat? How do I maintain that in a way that it doesn't leak out into the greater good? So I think what we're going to be building in the future is the building blocks in between those other blocks. And it really is like Legos in a lot of sense, where you're always searching for that one piece that you need in order to complete the bridge that you're trying to build. And so you cross the threshold of like it is more cost effective for us to use X, and it's great that they're continuing to innovate on things like the Assistance API. To make it easier so you can let go of some of that technical debt or technical baggage and just say, okay, we're going to use this going forward. But still be prepared to write the glue that ties all these pieces together. And
to your point around integration, there's, and you mentioned kind of where things started last year, there's been a lot of advancements really in the past 6 to 9 months, with making a lot of these frameworks and SDKs available for kind of your traditional full stack developer, right? And so I think probably when you started, you can take LangChain as an example. It was a Python-based library, kind of started that way, and then now you see the JavaScript implementation, catching up.
Definitely lagging, but it's there.
Yeah, and then other SDKs, coming, to fruition that are maybe even JavaScript first. Maybe so. Talk a little bit about that and like where you see your team starting to utilize, some of these.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fear for me in the very beginning, I'll be honest with you, because we traditionally don't write things in Python. We're very much a Node JavaScript based shop from a back-end perspective. And so seeing a lot of this tooling around AI built in Python, I was concerned that I was going to have to retrain an entire army of folks on a different language that they may not be comfortable with or maybe don't want to learn just because it's caught a bad rap in their perspective. It was good to see JavaScript implementations come out of some of the Python libraries because you could then say, okay, look at what they're doing. And they were open source. And it's like, look at really all they're doing here is wrapping an API call. We know how to make API calls. We're very good at making API calls. And so it was kind of a light bulb moment where we realized that, hey, this is right in our wheelhouse here. And so while it's great that LangChain exists and it demystifies a lot of the stuff that's out there, once you get over that demystification, you realize that you just apply a lot of the same development concepts that you've been using for the last 20 years into what is just now new technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think a lot of companies are going to be dealing with is just like here, we have a whole suite of components written for our production web apps, using, in our case, Node and JavaScript libraries.
That was my biggest fear in the beginning, was taking all of those common libraries that we have that give us access to Mongo, Postgres, or whatever the situation may be.
Or even more complicated features, right? Like commenting and attachments and notifications, right? We have a lot out there that's been built over the last 15 years.
And then trying to figure out how to rewrite some of that in Python if that was going to be required or not. Or how to integrate some of those things into what we were trying to build if it was going to be in a Python situation. So I had some fear and trepidation, because obviously, especially, even today, the Python libraries around AI are definitely more mature. But it is wonderful to see whether it's TypeScript or JavaScript. Those are definitely growing in maturity. And to your point, I think you're starting to see some JavaScript first. just for whatever. I think because people are just more comfortable with it.
And you and I have both been here for a while, so we've
Yeah.
seen kind of this evolution of microservices in the last,
Right.
say, 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is an enabler, right, for some of these AI features, right? Because you can build a microservice that's, featuring a specific type, whether it's RAG or, a specific agent that you want to
Yep.
build. And you can really determine at that point, do I need Python for this? Or, to your point, like, a lot of the JavaScript capabilities might already be there. Or maybe you just want to call the API directly, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So.
And I think you make a good point, because it's about the fit for purpose, right? And so take what's out there, realize, does it fit? Do I need to add on to it? Okay, now what's the most efficient way to add on to it? We're fortunate that we have an environment that can support the deployment of multiple languages through a very similar pipeline. So if it was going to be Python or it was going to be JavaScript, depending on the situation, it didn't matter.
Yeah, we take that for granted right now.
We
but,
do. I mean, if you think back to where we were 8 or 9 years ago, and the struggles that we have with deployments in general.
Trying to find a JVM that was available. And,
right.
Yeah.
And, get a Word document signed off on
right.
and all of that. But, through our CI/CD pipeline and the deployment environment that we have, we're very blessed to be able to build these things in whatever polyglot way we want to build them.
Yeah. It's a big word.
Yeah, it is. Especially for me. But no, but you're right. The advent of microservices and being able to say, I'm going to cordon off just this portion, and I'm going to write it in the most appropriate language using the most appropriate tooling is huge. So I think you need to take that into consideration when you're building something. If you're locked into a specific version of Java, for example, and that's the only thing you can use, your mileage may vary as it relates to being able to build some things on top of what's out there right now. So we're very fortunate in that.
Yeah, and so looking towards the future, so we have this, containerized platform that allows us to deploy, applications of any language. We now are integrating, generative AI features into that, whether it's using LangChain or using, API calls directly. One of the big challenges before us is to take some of these features, so in particular our chatbot that we call WWT GPT, and putting that out on the external website.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of challenges that come with that, and some of them are things that we're still kind of talking about, how do we go after, but from a containerization platform standpoint, it's great that we have the ability, to scale out those particular microservices,
Exactly.
right? And I think we even ran into some of that with our sales kickoff meeting this year, right? So we had kind of our big internal release, back this January, February timeframe.
Yep.
Maybe talk about that and how did that affect the team? And what did you guys do in terms of scaling?
Yeah, so I mean, anytime you do a big launch like that, it's always scary, and then you do it with a non-deterministic system, makes it even worse because you have no idea the answers it's going to give these 2,000 people you just cut loose on this application.
Yeah.
And they're all going to use it at exactly the same time. As soon as that URL goes up on the screen, there's 2,000 people in the audience trying to fire this thing up on their cell phone. And even that's a challenge, right? Because you're talking about massive amounts of data that you're trying to stream into all these different cell phones. So we were very concerned about the performance and the security and things of that nature. So we're, again, very fortunate that our development environment allows us to scale things that we're responsible for, vertically as quickly as we need to. I think our concern was, in the Azure environment, was it going to be able to withstand the load? We did a lot of testing up until that date. We really weren't sure how much load we were going to take on. I still think that there's room for us to get better at the load that we put on the LLMs. Taking advantage of the caching tools that are out there and things of that nature to take a little bit of the load off. But we did a lot of load testing leading up to that go live. We felt pretty confident with where we were. We knew that we were probably going to hit some limitations. So we put some governors in place, right? We limited the number of questions or prompts that somebody could submit in a given time frame. And we made that configurable so that we could kind of play with it as the day went on. To say, oh, wow, 25 for an hour is not a good story, we're getting hammered, or no, 10 is a good number, or no, 100 it would have been fine. So we had some flexibility built into the application that allowed us to kind of turn dials in order to make sure that we weren't burning the system out and providing a decent experience. Now, obviously, we cushioned the launch with, hey, this is a beta, right? So you may experience some bumps along the way, and if you do, here's a Teams community for you to come in and have a chat with us, so we can figure out exactly where we're missing the mark, so that we didn't have people out there using it, getting frustrated, and not saying anything. We wanted to make sure that we had an open forum where people could tell us what they were experiencing.
Yeah, and we went live with one of the PTUs, so process throughput units that Azure provides. And that is a dedicated instance of OpenAI, in our case, ChatGPT 4. We had one instance of that, and then 3 failover instances that were pay-as-you-go GPT-4s. And during that SKO event, we definitely surpassed the limits of the PTU and fell into those pay-as-you-go models.
Well, and it was hard leading up to that point, too, because we weren't using 4, right? So we were on 3.5 turbo for the longest time.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was kind of a late in the game switch leading up to the sales kickoff. And so we weren't even sure how well it was going to perform. I mean, you'd like to think that 4 is better than 3.5. It's more efficient, it's faster, whatever. But we didn't know, right? And I don't know that the world knew at that point. You base it on some assumptions. But yeah, we definitely exceeded the PTU. But you kind of expect that, and the way that they were being rationed out in the beginning too, we really were kind of behind a barrel as it related to that. I think now there's a little bit more general availability. It's a little bit easier to get some of that dedication. Obviously, it's going to cost, so that's something you have to keep in mind. But we definitely had some early on surprises, but I think it's helped us figure out how do we do this going forward. It
does, and now we're facing the question of GPT 4.0, right? So that just came out a few weeks ago, and we're in the process this week of kind of standing that up within Azure and switching everything over to it, making sure that all the API endpoints are still compatible with what we're doing, and with some of the speed improvements that we hope to see with 4.0, that could be the point where we retire the PTU, at least for now, because one of the main benefits of the PTU was performance, and if 4.0 is giving us better performance, then maybe that's kind of where we go for the time being.
Yeah, and hopefully it's a little bit more cost effective to scale out too. And I think time will determine that. But when you're dealing with such an unknown, you want to pay for that dedication up front just to make sure that you've got at least that, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how 4.0 handles load going forward. I got to think it's going to be pretty good based on some of the benchmark I've seen, especially coming out of OpenAI and ChatGPT in particular. So I think we're heading in the right direction. I think we'll be able to do some cost containment and like you said, retire the PTU, so it'll save us a little bit there, where we can then have a little bit more flexibility and control over how we flex.
And the load question is an interesting one because my team has a practice of doing weekly load tests and then comparing those results week over week, and that's where we see some benefits. Whereas with something like an LLM load test, you're talking about potentially thousands of dollars,
just to run the test.
Just to run the test, right? So that's one of the questions we have is all right, if we build a load test, how often can we run it, and how do we do this effectively without breaking the bank?
Well, and to take the testing thing a little bit further, how can you test that you're actually you're getting the answers that you want? Right? So that's what makes developing some of these systems so hard, is that you're going to get wildly different answers depending on the mood of the LLM. And so then you want to keep testing, right? So now you're double, triple, quadrupling down on the testing you're doing to make sure that you don't ever get an answer that's out in left field that's going to send you down the wrong path or make a customer unhappy, or make a salesperson unhappy, make an executive unhappy especially. So you really do have to be very cost conscious of what you're doing there.
Yeah, and Azure, last week at the Microsoft Build Conference, they released, Azure AI Studio, generally available. And one of the new features there is this evaluation framework, right? Where you can have a set of prompts that are constantly being, sent through your project to evaluate, groundedness and how effective the answers are. So I'm excited to try that out and kind
Yeah.
of see how that works. We do have a custom solution right now that kind of does the same thing. But obviously, as we build more projects, we would love for something that's a little bit more, configuration based as opposed to building it from scratch every time.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the market's going too. Is like, okay, great, we've got these LLMs and we've got these APIs over the top of them, and that's all fine and dandy. But like, what about all the things that help you verify that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So a lot of the load testing and accuracy testing and things of that nature, I think there's a market still untapped there. Obviously, Microsoft is starting to dip their toe into. But I think you're going to see other vendors jump into that space too, and probably end up selling whatever they do to Microsoft. But it's really going to be an interesting area to watch, is the tooling around the building of these things and what's available and how can you take advantage of it.
Yeah. So maybe just generally speaking, talk a little bit about, any of the learnings along the way, like what kind of failures, have you experienced, and what have you learned from them?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's natural. Anytime you get into utilizing new tech, you're going to trip and fall.
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? It's really about the journey instead of the destination when it comes to this stuff, and what you learn along the way and how that makes you stronger going forward. I think about when we switched, like I said earlier, between the completions and the chat API in a completely different structure. Like, we'd built everything around one, and now all of a sudden we had to switch to another. And so there was constant hiccups as related to that. Kevin, I think, has probably mentioned RAG in the past. And so, we started out trying to use, Azure Cognitive Search, and, just understanding how well,
as opposed to a vector database.
Vector database, right? So trying to figure out how accurate is it in, developing that semantic score that says, yes, this result is more in line to the question that's being asked. We tripped and fell a lot with just allowing the natural prompt that the user provided as the first thing to the LLM, and letting it normalize that prompt into something that you then fed to Azure Cognitive Search, got your answers. Well, we didn't realize that, back in the day, the LLM was taking a question like, who is so-and-so, and just basically truncating that to the name, right? It was taking off the who is part.
Oh, wow.
And so now you're just feeding a name to the cognitive search, and it's like, I'm not really going to be able to give you that successful of a result.
Yeah.
So the semantic scoring was way off, and so it was hard to say, yes, this is a good answer or not. So, it
was trying to translate it into a more Lucene type of search.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Because you don't want to provide the cognitive search with let's just say the user prompted a paragraph.
Yeah.
You don't want to feed a paragraph into
Sure.
a cognitive search. You want to kind of normalize that a little bit.
Into
Lucene,
keywords.
Right.
Yeah.
Keywords. That search is going to be able to digest a little bit better. But, so there's a lot of prompt engineering work that went on in the very beginning, where it was a lot of learning. And it's like, teaching, for those who haven't done it before, a system prompt, right, where you're providing the LLM with hey, you are a helpful assistant who knows how to do this, and translate this user query into something that you can do a cognitive search on. Like, it was a lot of learning in the beginning on how to make that as effective as possible, because that's where a lot of our false starts were coming from, and we're getting a wildly different array of answers from the LLM at the end of the day, was because we had a very non-deterministic generalization of our queries that we then sent to a cognitive search tool, which we then tried to get bounce against an LLM for a generative answer. So lots of learning along the way with that. I think if I could suggest, to anybody, not just a developer, but anybody who uses this tooling, is go out and learn about prompt engineering, because the prompt that you feed these tools is very dictative of the answer that you're going to get back out, right? And you're going to get a much more successful answer or content generated based on the prompt that you feed it. So that benefits somebody out there using ChatGPT in the wild. It benefits a developer who's building a system that knows how to ask questions of these things. Everybody needs to get a better grip on how to answer
and so I think questions. For maybe some of the newbies out there, they might not realize the difference between a user prompt and then like the system message, right? I think what you're talking about is the system message, right? Like having a very, cohesive system message that is basically the working set of instructions for the model.
You're instructing the model how to behave, essentially.
And that was interesting. I went out to an Azure summit a few weeks ago at Microsoft's campus, and they were talking about responsible AI and their approach to that. So things like content filtering and making sure that not only is your message on brand, but you're removing things like violent or hate speech from it. And so they've got a lot of tools now that are in that space. And what they're doing is basically just enhancing your system message, right? So providing a very verbose system message that's giving it, a set of rules to operate by.
Yeah, but that comes with the cost too, right?
Yeah,
because
it does.
your verbose system message is consuming tokens, right?
Yeah.
As part of the prompt, and so it's a balancing act. And again, very much a learning for us in the beginning to make sure that we weren't going to get a $30,000 blip surprise bill from Azure,
right?
But at the same time, wanting this thing to be successful and not having it trip over itself and not provide the user a great experience with the content that's being generated. So it's definitely a balancing act.
Yeah. All right. So, at Worldwide, we have, kind of a history of doing hackathons every year. And you guys started something, I guess, just recently called a Learnathon.
Yep.
What is a Learnathon and what did you learn?
Well, so we had the operations summit where we kind of, Kevin's mentioned this probably before, where we brought all of our operational groups together and said, hey, what ideas
generate ideas.
What ideas do you have around generative AI? What problems do you have that we could use Gen AI to solve? And we didn't want to lose momentum coming out of that because we knew it was going to take a while to digest that and prioritize that, et cetera. But we wanted to make sure that we were taking a solid look at those ideas. And so Kevin wanted to have a hackathon where we threw some of those ideas against the wall and see what stuck. I quickly realized that, we didn't have the knowledge, within the entire IT department yet to be able to throw folks at problems and expect them to develop solutions. So Kevin went out of town. And I rebranded it a Learnathon.
All right.
And went ahead and sent out all the meeting invites and all the posters and all of that stuff to change the name to Learnathon. And so it became an environment where we had some pre-events where we educated folks on what some of the different technology that we had available to us was. So Copilot Studio, for example, was kind of an up-and-coming replacement for Power Virtual Assistants. We had access to Copilot Studio, so we educated folks on what Copilot Studio could and couldn't do. The Power Platform, we obviously also use Power Platform, so again, what can it do and how can you use it and how can you learn more about it? The custom stuff that we've been developing, we educated folks on all of these things and then said, okay, hey, we've given you a very cursory level introduction to this stuff, but here it is. Take advantage of this time that we've carved out. Use this 3 days to just go out and learn as much as you can. And what I was trying to impress upon people was, again, it's about the journey, not the destination. I don't care if your product works or not.
Sure.
What did you learn about this technology that you can bring back and share with everybody up on stage and be like, here's where this really worked out well. Here's where we tripped and fell. Here's where we still don't understand how it was or wasn't working. And so we had a big 3-hour presentation, where different groups got up and kind of walked through their process and what they experienced. And so we had that common shared understanding of what's going on. So it was great. And so we're going to springboard that into ongoing education. So you and I will be working together on figuring out, what kind of general ed can we give everybody? And then what kind of electives can we give the different specialized groups?
Yeah.
So Salesforce team, what can you do in the Einstein space, and the Power Platform team, what can you guys do, et cetera. So looking forward to continuing to educate our folks on how all this works. And it's evolving on a daily basis, maybe an hourly basis. And so it'll be an interesting challenge for us to stay on top of that and keep our teams on top.
Yeah, and one of the things we've been talking about is, establishing an AI ambassador program. So an idea of, within the delivery teams having certain people who are, expected to kind of bring those best practices into the team so they can stay connected to what we're doing in the Center of Excellence and be able to, educate the rest of the team, because the Center of Excellence is going to stay small, and we can only scale by education and making sure that there are other advocates for AI best practices throughout the organization.
Absolutely. And I think we've got teams that are hungry for it too, which is good, because I think it's a change from where we were a year ago, where everybody was scared of it because they didn't understand it. They didn't know how it worked. And so now you demystify that by educating. all of a sudden you take all those people who are naturally hungry developers to begin with, and you cut them loose on some stuff they feel a little bit better on. It's going to help create a really well-rounded ecosystem of things that we build.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Brian. Thanks for visiting the podcast and for sharing your insights.
This is great. Happy to be here.
Well, that was a great conversation. I want to thank Brian for joining us and sharing his valuable insights and experiences with AI. I think it's important to remember that AI technology is evolving rapidly, and we need to be flexible and adaptable to keep up with the changes and opportunities. AI can be integrated and applied in various ways, depending on the use case and the user needs. But we need to understand the problem we're trying to solve and the value we're trying to deliver. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to tune in next time, when we'll dive deeper into the concept of an AI Center of Excellence and why it's important for helping you scale your AI efforts enterprise-wide. We're looking forward to it. See you then.